Let's start the next session. It's my pleasure to chair this session on analyzing energy policy. Now we have 4 speakers in the session that are going to talk about different topics that all relate more or less to analysis from a demand side of view with different modifications. We are going to start with a presentation by Daví-Arderius here from University of Barcelona, who is going to look at the interaction of renewable investments and location patterns, especially looking at the question of what happens if incumbents have different information than newcomers, and what does that mean for investment patterns of these newcomers, as well in terms of efficiency. Then we will have a paper by Gautier. Axel, oh yeah, okay. It's correct okay, from Axel Gautier, who's going to look at photovoltaic power installation in Wallonia, basically looking at the rebound effect from PV, trying to understand, I think, a quite interesting phenomena, how is energy usage going to be affected by the introduction of this new technology, PV, that is providing the PV owners substantially lower energy bills, and as well might incentivize them to install big PV systems, as we'll see in the Wallonian case. And Axel is going to tell us about these rebound effects that this regulation might imply. And then we have a paper looking on a neighboring market, French market, which is a paper by António Marques, who's looking at the supply and demand in the French system, looking at high frequency prices, and as well trying to understand the implications of reduction of nuclear capacity and the entrance of renewables and the role demand side management can play in the French market. And we are going to finish the session with a presentation by Rocio Román-Collado from the University of Seville, who's going to continue with these consumer perspective now on costs, thinking about how electricity costs might be generated and might be attributed in the Spanish market using index decomposition approaches and looking at wholesale market behavior. We know these approaches mainly from quantity-based type of decompositions on energy efficiency, on CO2 emissions. So here we try to decompose price components and costs, trying to probably as well identify possible irregularities in the wholesale electricity market behavior. So that's the program for the next 2 hours. I think we will dedicate about 20 minutes to the presentations. We might as well take some immediate question afterwards, and there might as well be some possibility to discuss the whole session after we have heard the individual presentations. So with this short introduction, I would then give the floor to Dani with the first presentation.
Thank you very much. Who has the...
That's me. You get this as well.
Okay. Hello, good afternoon. It's a pleasure for me to be here presenting this paper. I will present you this paper, which is analyzing electricity flows and congestions, looking at locational patterns. This paper with my 2 co-authors, Professor María Teresa Costa and Elisa Trujillo. Okay, this is the background, as we have talked a lot in this symposium today, yesterday. What is more relevant is that to accomplish with our targets, we must connect a lot of renewables in the grids, and in 2050, most production must be with renewables. Therefore, that implies an important change on the supply side. in the production of electricity. Then, this is the motivation of this paper. So in the process of connecting this new production, which is a lot of capacity, there is an asymmetric information between incumbent generators, that is producers that have their own plants operating in the grids, and entrant generators that want to enter in the grid to connect their new plants, especially in two main issues. On one side, who is connected in the grid knows, have better knowledge about the capacity of the grid, and have better knowledge about potential congestions in the grid. Why that? Because a generator who is connected knows if the system operator applies to them or to it some technical constraints, so they can deduce that information. Therefore, that results in a potential market failure, which can affect competition. So, moreover, as a consequence of that asymmetric information, this new capacity could be located in some locations that could affect the whole efficiency of the system, as you will see in following slides, which could have an impact on the social welfare. We are thinking in the idea that depending in which locations, that could imply building more grids. So more grids are more cost for consumers, which affects the social welfare. For that idea, these are the aim of this paper. We aim to analyze the transmission grid in Spain to know the flows, because we want to answer the two following questions. The first one is how locations of the existing technologies affects or explain flows, and using that information, if congestions we have nowadays in Spain could follow locational patterns that could affect potential locations of new renewables. Then, regarding the literature about analysis of real electricity systems, well, the efficiency of renewables has been analyzed in the literature, but using information of real electricity systems, there's not too much literature, because especially too many constraints. The first one is that the availability of real data sets are important. The information is not fully available. Moreover, depending in which models you use, you need large computational requirements, because you have to deal with large data sets. Moreover, regarding methodologies used to analyze electricity systems, there are two main groups. The first one is most engineering models that use to optimize models. They are used to simulate how the electricity system could perform if we built a new grid or not. They are optimal power flow models. They are used in most studies that tries to simulate what will happen in Germany if we split the bidding zone in two or three parts. But in this paper, we use an ex-post model, which is a gravity model. This is not being used quite common. It is not common in energy, the analysis of energy flows, which provides different outcomes. We use that models to see what happened in the past. So we will see what happened in Spain in the transmission grid to propose regulatory recommendations. Well, looking at the regulatory framework for renewables, just comment that feed-in tariff was very effective, but some authors say that the location of renewables was not so efficient because, from the point of view of the system, because these plants were located in the highest performing sites. And however, some countries are already implementing some locational incentives in capacity actions, because the idea is some countries see that they should provide some incentives to locate renewables in some specific locations over another ones. And another regulatory framework that affects location of renewables is that connecting charges and the use of system charges. This morning we have seen that nowadays we have in many countries postage stamps, as in Spain, but some recommendations we will provide here go in the way that change that point, as Christopher has this morning proposed us. So it does it in Spain. Spain is a quite relevant case. We have a lot of renewables in the grid. But in that case, what we consider most relevant is not only the amount of green production we have in the grid, but also the amount of grid we have built in Spain. We have increased in 26 years, 58% the transmission grid, especially to feed, to connect renewables in the north to the center of the country. So at the end, this amount of grids represents a cost for consumers. So if we have to connect a large amount of new renewables, we are worried about that, and we will try to see how to align this grid extension and new location for renewables. So this is the Spanish map, Google Maps background, and you see the network, the 400 kilowatts network we use in this paper. We have modelized that. Each black dot point are a substation, are nodes, and each red line are electric lines that connect each pair of nodes. And we use that information, and we combine that information with the location of production of the plants. We have the main production plants in Spain, and we have the hourly production of these plants, and we have the hourly flows of this between each pair of nodes. So this information allows us to, this is a data set we have. We use that information to make to use that in a gravity model. So we combine each pair of nodes. We have node A, node J, and in each node we have the production per technology, which is fit in each hour. So with this information, we are able to make a gravity model of estimation. This is the model we estimate here. What we estimate is how the flow is explained by the production in A and J, the production divided by technology. We also control by the length of the distance between each pair of nodes. And we control also CD and CC, which are the centrality controls, because when we estimate a gravity model, a node with a gravity model, we should control the location of each node with respect to the other ones. We also control by the distance to the main cities, because flows are not only explained by the production that is connected there, but also if they are located in a main city or not. So this is the outcome. I will show you in the following slide more detailed results, because there are a lot of numbers. First of all, to validate the model, what we see is that in the peak time, because we use an hourly information, but we transform into observations per day, one for peak, the other one for the off-peak. When we include the dummy variable, we see that flows in the peak are higher than off-peak, which is obvious. We see that in our model, which validates our model. And another interesting result, which we used to validate, but it's also interesting, is that the distance is positively related with the flows. That means that as longer is the line, higher are the flows. That means that transmission grids are mostly used to send energy from further generation plants. So using that information, I will show you more in detail results, two kinds of results. In the first one, you will see how efficient is located each technology regarding demand. And we will see if these congestions are so heterogeneous or not within Spain. So comparing coefficients in the source and in the destination, which this is the results that provide a gravity model, we are able to see how efficient are each technology located. So how relevant is injecting in the difference between injecting in the source and in the destination. What we see here is that for hydro and imports, they are the less efficiently located, considering the whole system, which is obvious because hydropower used to be in the countryside, far from consumption, and imports are in the border. In the opposite, for instance, combined cycle, the distance effect is 0. And that's why, because most of these plants used to be in the seaports close to the main cities. So what we see here is that location of technologies affects efficiency. So we should be careful where we locate new technologies because we could affect efficiency of the system. And efficiency is the flows, are the flows in the transmission. So if we use the same model, but instead we include a dummy variable for each NUTS2 area in Spain, these are communities autonomous, we are able to know which are the congestions in each area, on the grids that are in each area, over the average. And we see, let's look at a map, because in a map you can see that better, that in Spain, this is how are congestions in the transmission. We have a higher level of congestion in the north of the country, especially where we have a lot of wind capacity. And if we compare that congestions to where we have the main consumption, which is in Madrid or in Barcelona or in Catalonia, we see a lower level of congestions. So we see that, and we also see that in the south we have not a very high level of congestions. So we see that, using that picture, congestions are not homogeneous in Spain. So we must be careful where we connect more renewables. This is the main conclusion. So let's look at the conclusions of this paper. So the first one is that locations of technologies explains flows, as we have seen, and the flows, which are congestions, follow locational patterns. So they are concentrated in some specific areas. Therefore, when we have to locate new renewables, we must analyze in detail where we connect these new plants, because nowadays we have plants located in some areas, I'm thinking in coal, in nuclear plants, that if new capacity is not located in the same location, we could modify that congestions, which could affect congestions and could imply building more grids, which at the end represents an extra cost for consumers. So otherwise, therefore, we need planning and so a deep cost-benefit analysis. So if we look a step further and we look at the regulatory recommendations for new renewables, the main idea is we should provide some locational incentives for new renewables. If you let the market decide where they want to locate, it has been working up to date, but we should provide some incentives, perhaps not locating in the most richest area of the primary resource, but in the less optimal location. So this could be included, for instance, in the future capacity auctions. Some countries are already thinking in that idea, and in Mexico they have implemented that. Another possibility, there are several, but another one could be, for instance, changing the postal network charges. This morning we have been discussing about that. Some ideas have been put on the table, because we see that we should give some locational incentives to let the market put where the efficiency of the system would be better, and at the end don't harm the social welfare, which is the maximum targets of the regulatory. So that's all, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks a lot. Dami, so probably we open for 2-3 questions right after the discussion, right after the presentation to start the discussion. So who wants to? Sure.
Congratulations, Dani, for the presentation.
Thank you.
Really interesting. Just a regulatory question. In the last slide, you were pointing out that you required some kind of locational incentives, probably for new generation capacity, renewables, in order to choose or to promote a location that is not so costly for the system. For the existing ones, technologies, in which kind of regulatory measures are you thinking?
For the existing, there is, well, For the existing, the only one that could apply is that changing the charges. However, it's difficult because if we change the rules and they have made their business plans with considering one cost and you change that, it's difficult. Moreover, for the existing, I think the picture is the picture which is, so if you put, if you change the charges, they will produce the same. So it's the efficiency of this regulatory recommendation is when you decide the location, but when we're located, you produce that. So it's difficult because what we decide to stop renewable plants, I think, is not efficient. So the main idea is to include in the decision of locating, but when you're located, you can change that and you only affect the business plans of them, but they will produce the same. Yes, I think it's the only way to make that efficient.
Christoph.
I can speak up, so two questions. I was not clear how you located consumption. Clearly you had the locations of the production sites, but how did you approximate there in the grid you have your demands? Was that close to cities, or what was the assumption if you...
In the model, in the question, I include to each node which is the distance to the closest main city. Therefore, it's a way to know if that node is closer or farther than consumption.
Okay, so you take the population or the city size
yes,
as a
the
proxy.
population.
And then, you use gravity model, and so that's somehow a proxy. So I'm more familiar, you talked about optimal flow. So this PDDF, for example, I just looked up the abbreviation is power transfer distribution factors, where you have a physical network and you have to account for loop flows. And then the question is, to what extent you can capture, say, relatively established models, like you mentioned, with what you call what you have as a new approach, the gravity model, which has hardly been applied. And maybe the reason for not applying it is that it could be a bad proxy to think about how injection at some point affects the whole flow, because you have this loop flow aspect. So it's not enough to just put a network and keep that static, but you have to keep the real physics in the model. And so my suggestion would be at some point, you could compare your model with some engineering type model like the PDDF stuff, for example, and see how good your proxy is.
Yes, however, if in the models you're mentioning, the result is the flow. Here I use the flow as a given, so I'm not estimating the flow. Okay. Your models are useful to simulate how a new network or a new plant could affect the flows. Therefore, in this analysis, we see what is happening now. So the following step is what you're mentioning. The only way is to use an optimization model, because in the optimization uses the principle that energy travels for the easier way. But here I use flows as given. So this is a way to use potentials of flows. But I agree with you that this could be a following step of that with that analysis, for sure.
So probably I might add one question, which is a little bit more on the policy recommendations, because in the policy recommendations you were, for example, suggesting to put locational patterns in renewable support schemes, but of course this is only one possibility to deal with this phenomena. So in the German case, we put a lot of trust as well on extending our grid and our network. So I wonder why, or whether this plays a big role in Spain as well. To me, I'm not familiar with the Spanish system, but of course that would be another opportunity or possibility to deal with that. And I would just ask you for your assessment about possibilities to deal with these phenomena. We as well talked about, of course, the issue of nodal pricing or other things to deal with this. So there are different possibilities on the table. So why have you now picked the locational pattern in the renewable support system?
Well, first of all, the grid extension is a possibility, which is done. However, we should be aware that when we build a new grid, we have two costs. One is the financial cost, and the other one is the environmental cost. And we have a social pressure against new grids. So I think we should consider nowadays, especially the second one, because it's very difficult. We have in Spain a lot of experience with that. We spent 30 years to make a high voltage grid to connect Spain from France. Mm-hmm. And of course, we should consider that in the question. But as I mentioned, we should make a cost-benefit analysis. So I think in the idea of that paper is give an idea that we should align regulatory activity, which are grids, with liberalization, with generation. So if we try to align, perhaps we won't have to build as much grid as if we want. Another price is another possibility, but it's changing all the rules. So we can propose that. However, we should put our feet on the floor. So if we change the rules, perhaps it's more difficult to be applied in the reality. But everything is possible.
Yeah. I think that's as well interesting. I mean, to look a little bit more on these welfare effects. No, I mean, we have a forthcoming paper in Resource and Energy Economics where we do that for the German regulation. In Germany, we have a locational pattern already because we measure the amount of feed-in tariffs that you're getting on your wind speed. And this is actually giving more subsidies to low windy areas. No, so there is some locational pattern that's driving or that's working against the usual optimization that you were just describing, and it's actually probably not. It actually could be welfare enhancing. So it might be interesting to as well try to frame this in a welfare perspective, because then what seems to be not a good idea from a narrow sense might be a good idea from a more overall welfare optimization point of view. Bringing renewables in these locations, which they would usually not end up by just optimizing the profits.
But however, I think if you compare Spain to your country, in Germany, you have a lot of capacity in the north. But in Spain, we have a lot of capacity in the north. We have a lot of wind capacity, wind potential in Catalonia, for instance, which we are not using. We have wind PV capacity in the south. So I think perhaps in your country, your problem is worse than in ours, because you have a lot of offshore wind capacity in the north, which is not in the south. So perhaps we don't need in Spain so strong regulatory change. The idea is, if we use the capacity we have, we think we could try to align that easier.
Excellent. So that's a good finish for a policy session for the first part of this. So thanks again for a presentation, for the discussion.
Thank you very much.
And let's move to the next presentation. Axel Gautier from the University of Liege. Liege. I'm actually passing through Liege all the time when I go to Brussels, so I should know it. No, that's true. No,
yeah,
see,
it's true.
Okay, good. So, floor is yours.
Okay. Let's have the slides. Okay, perfect. So thank you for the invitation. So this is a joint paper with Nicolas Bocard from the University of Girona, who is here in the audience, about photovoltaic power installation in Wallonia. And what we do is to estimate what we call the rebound effect. So this is a story about something we can call wrongly designed policy. And we will show that consumers react to incentives, and they react in a way that was not expected by those who designed the policy, but that is somehow previsible if you believe in the rational homo economicus story. I should say that I think that rebound effects are quite important in energy, and they could somehow create a lot of problems and offset part of the benefits of all this green policy because of what this rebound effect. And there were several speakers emphasizing on the role of consumers in energy transition. And I think it's very important, especially for electricity, because it's some kind of invisible good, so it's not easy to monitor your consumption. It's not even easy to know the price of energy. So we need to know how consumers react to policy. And when we design policy, we should take that into account. So it's about photovoltaic power in Belgium, but Belgium, it's not a known place for being sunny, so there's not a lot of sunshine, as you can see on the picture. But despite that, there are many photovoltaic installations. In all the country, and you know that Belgium is a complicated country, we have different regions, and all the regions, they apply supporting scheme to solar PV. More or less the framework is the same for all the regions, but there are some small differences because each region designs its own policy, and I will focus only on Wallonia, the southern part of Belgium. So if you look at the figure here, now in Wallonia there are more than 140,000 PV installations with an average capacity of 6 kilowatt peak, which is quite huge, and this represents, roughly speaking, a bit less than 10% of the households. And you see the picture show the huge growth. So, of course, one reason for that is the supporting scheme in place. And the supporting scheme in place is composed of two things: a subsidy to production and a net metering system. So the subsidy to production is called Sol-Watt program, and I will detail this on the slide. So the idea is that there is a tradable green certificate mechanism. So each time you produce green energy, you receive a green certificate. And for the solar energy, the granting rate was 7. So each time per megawatt hour, you receive 7 certificates. And there is a market for this certificate where retailers have to buy and they have to certify part of the production. And this market has specificities that there is a price floor and a price ceiling. So price floor of €65, a price ceiling corresponding to the administrative fine for missing certificate of €100. This program was a program for residential solar panels, so for household, not for large installation. And so the eligibility threshold is less than 10 kilowatt peak. It was in place from 2008 till 2014, where at that time, because it turns out to be extremely costly, in 2014 it was transformed to another subsidy, less generous program. We estimate with Nicolas a subsidy by this green certificate of more than €500 per megawatt hour produced. And it's important to understand my rebound effect papers that, roughly speaking, the green certificates are so generous that they cover the cost of the module. The second part of the subsidy is the net metering system in place. So with the net metering system, you have a single meter to record the exchange with the grid. So it means that if you produce more than your consumption, you inject electricity to the grid and your meter runs backward. If you produce less than your consumption, then you import electricity from the grid and the meters runs onward like a traditional meter. So in fact, at the end, the meters records only the difference between consumption and production. So what we call net import, and your bill is based on this net import. So two important things to mention is that if you produce more than your consumption, your bill is zero. So you do not have an extra credit for that. And the other thing is that in Belgium, tariffs are mostly volumetric. So if your capacity is enough to cover your consumption, your bill is almost zero. Let's say zero. So what we test, in fact, is that because this program, subsidizing scheme, is generous, it encourages people to build or to large size installation and eventually larger than their past consumption. And then if you produce more than what you consumed in the past, you have free electricity that you supply to the grid. So we test whether these people invest or consume this free electricity. And you mentioned in your keynote at the beginning that electricity could be free, and we will show in this paper that when electricity is free, there is some extra consumption by the household. So we test the hypothesis that there is a substantial rebound effect created by this policy. So I won't be long on describing rebound effect, but it's well known in the field of energy. The idea is that you have new technologies. These new technologies are more efficient. So for instance, they consume less electricity, or it's cheaper way to produce electricity. In principle, if consumption remains constant, it will generate saving. But what we observe is that there is some rebound effect, and people tend to consume or use more the technologies that are more efficient. Classical example is that we now construct vehicles which are more fuel efficient, and then we see that people buy more powerful engines or all these things. So this is a classical. There were few papers who tried to test. So and then it's prevalent. So there are many papers who try to test for a rebound effect about electric appliance, electricity production, and so on. So there are few works who try to test for a rebound effect using for solar PV. One paper from the UK where you have self-assessed reduction in consumption. A paper by Wittenberg from Germany when there was no significant effect. A paper by Deng from Australia who found that prosumers tend to consume more than non-prosumers. Second paper from Germany saying that there is no significant effect of turning prosumers. So evidence are quite mixed. And how do we interpret this mixed evidence? That is probably highly dependent on the institutional context in place. So let's turn to what we are doing. So we have data from the main distribution system operator in Wallonia, covering this yellow area on the map, 191 municipalities out of 2,062. It's the merger between 7 smaller DSO, and interestingly for the study, they continue to keep 7 different distribution tariffs in the pre-merging zone. So we have all the data of the prosumers in these regions, which means 100,000 prosumers. We have data from 2010 to 2017. And what do we have? We have anonymous EAN, so this is an identification for the meter. And then we have the yearly meter readings, we have the PV installation date and the PV installation size and the zip code for the installation. So we have, that's the data we have. So the unit of observation is the meter. And so we estimate, so we call tau the installation date for the PV modules, and we estimate the consumption before and the consumption after. It's quite complex because we need to read the meter, so it's raw data. And for consumption before, you take the index, and then you take the previous index, you take the difference, that's the consumption. For the consumption after, the meter's readings does not give you consumption, but it gives you the difference between consumption and production. So we have to add production to the meter reading to have the consumption after. We take an advantage that Belgium and Wallonia is small. So what we do, we estimate production by taking the power of the installation, multiplying by monthly capacity factor that we estimate. Then we correct then we use what we call standard load profile in order to split the observed consumption on every day, basically. And we take the average consumption of prosumers 24 months before and 24 months after, and we compare. This picture shows you what we do. So the red line is the meter load, and you see that around 2013, these all installed solar panels. Then the blue line is meter load plus PV output, and then we use standard load profile curves to split this blue line, red and blue lines on different days. What we do is to construct two groups of prosumers, the group we call oversized and the group we call undersized. So a prosumer is in the oversized group if the capacity of its installation is larger than his past consumption. So he has more modules, he can cover all his consumption with his, and even more with his module. And the undersized group is contains all prosumers who have an installation that is not sufficient to cover their past consumption. So again, because of this net metering system, the oversized group have free or zero price electricity. So it means that their production surplus, should consumption be constant, is injected for free to the grid. They still get the green certificate for that, but it's injected for free to the grid. So we test whether they are consuming this free electricity or not. And this is a picture that is it's not unexpected. So what we do is that we plot on these pictures, but unfortunately you don't see the points. But we plot. I will look at descriptive statistics. Okay. So here you have daily consumption, and you have daily consumption before and after divided by quartiles. And for the full sample, for the undersized group and the oversized group. And what we observe is that for the undersized group, we observe a slight decrease in consumption after compared to the consumption before. I think it's minus 4%. And for the oversized group, we observe a very large increase in the consumption. You see that first quintile from 6.9 to 9, second from 9.7 to 12, third from 12.5 to 16.5, and in average consumption increased by 35%. So next we do some econometric analysis where our dependent variable is the load change, so the variation delta Q in consumption. We explain variation in consumption by variation in temperature, which could be a driver of electricity consumption. And then we construct this oversized indicator, which measure, conditional on being in the oversized group, the free electricity available, that is the difference between production and past consumption, or much electricity you have for free. And then we use the mean distribution tariff, not as it written on the slide, from T minus 24 to T plus 24, but from the average distribution tariff after the PV installation data. And we control for installation size, and we estimate the following equation. So the variation in consumption is explained by variation in temperature, price, capacity, and this oversize indicator. And the results, I don't know how much time I have.
5 minutes, I guess.
Okay, that's cool. So we observe first that price is a negative side. So there is price, negative relation between price and quantity. Good point. And I would like to comment on this. So we have tons of observation. We have 65,000 observation. And I would like to comment on the sign of the theta coefficient, so the oversized variable, which is 87. So it means that every 3 kilowatt hour is consumed at 87%. So people consume most of their free electricity they have, and this is a significant rebound effect. Then just let me conclude. So we test for this rebound effect of solar PV in a very particular institutional context. I say it's not particular to Wallonia. I think that we could have the same if you take other data from other regions in Belgium, because the system was similar. And we have an exhaustive data set covering not all the region, but most of the region, and a single DSO. And what we observe is that oversizing of the installation is quite common. So we have in the data, say 40 or 50% of the installations who are oversized compared to past consumption. Of course, it's not necessarily causality. It could be you can oversize your installation because you want to have a swimming pool or you want to have a heat pump or things like that. So, but net metering creates this illusion of free electricity if you have an oversized installation. And what we observe is that households massively consume this free electricity. We had anecdotal evidence from DSO, and this paper confirms the anecdotal evidence. Interestingly is that in Belgium you produce a lot of solar electricity during summer, and we consume a lot of electricity during winter. So there could be some shifting. So in parallel with this study, we conduct a survey among prosumers, and when we observe that there's the response that the main vector for increasing their consumption is electric heating, so there could be shifting from production during summer to electric heating during winter. And this is something that we would like to investigate further, whether there is substitution between, say, gas or gasoline for heating with electricity. It should be investigated further. And I think that's it. I will conclude with this. We still need, I think, to improve a little bit the econometrics, but the message is quite clear. We have an institutional framework which encourage people to consume massively the electricity they were producing and not giving back to the grid. Well, you mentioned, or other speakers mentioned, that massive injection of electricity into the grid could be a problem. Here you have both of new consumption, and you also have, because consumption and production are not simultaneous, you have, I guess, massive injection of electricity on the grids. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Axel, for the presentation. Now, again, we might have 2-3 questions just after the presentation.
The price of the electricity at the different hours are different, or are they equal?
At different location?
No. At different hours of the day.
No, so we don't have smart meters. So what you can have is to have a dual meter for day and night. But usually if you have a large size installation, the best is to switch to a single meter where you have a single constant price for all days and all hours.
Okay, then all the time you are matching electricity, no value.
So with the net metering system, the best, so if you have a large size installation, the best is to switch to a single meter where you have one single price constant over the days and over the hours.
And my question is, in your sample, all the consumers have this kind of meter that don't discriminate or not?
No, they do not necessarily all have this meter. So you still have the choice, so you still have the option. But definitely, if you have a large size installation, you will switch to a single meter. No, you will even, so most of the non-prosumers have dual meter day and night because it's good deals. But if you become prosumers and if you have a large size installation, you should shift to a single meter. But we have the meter recording, and if you switch from dual meter to single meter, in fact, you can do it virtually. So you don't need to change the meter, because you can say to the DSO, I switch to the single, and so the DSO aggregates the two indexes. But in the data, we have the two indexes, and we don't know what is the tariff plan of that consumer.
Yeah, this is the reason, because it might happen, I don't know, that because the oversized choose a kind of meter and underside the other kind of meter, might be the results could be have to be to analyze a little further. I don't know, I am suggesting that the elasticity value may change because of that. But think about that.
Yeah, we'll think about that, because so we do not have information about the tariff plan, but we know, so if a prosumer had dual metering, so day and night before, and switch, so we still have the recording of the dual meters, so we can, so we can see when it's consuming, basically.
I might have a follow-up question concerning data and identification. So, what about batteries in the Belgium households? I mean, is that common, and would that matter in this respect? I mean, can they have different consumption patterns? No, if they have combined PV systems and battery sets.
So, in fact, the system with the net metering is such that it's not rational to invest in a battery, because if you produce in excess, you can inject on the grid, the meters runs backward, and you can consume later. So you don't really need a battery. And so there are very few, so it's not like if you have a systems like in Germany, where you have a meter for the injection and a meter for the for taking, then having a battery could be a good deal. But with the single net metering system, it's not. So there are people who have batteries, but few, and we don't know. But we have, I think, very few people have a battery for the moment. And then also, I did not mention that during the talk. So we use data mainly from the SolWatt program, who ended in 2014. And I don't think in 2014 people had batteries.
Okay. And do you think this rebound story is going to continue? Because it, of course, as well depends on these technological developments, on the retail prices, and so is that...
Well, for those who were in the program, so even if they change the subsidizing scheme, they change the subsidizing scheme for new installation. So for me, this effect continues.
Oh, we have another question here. Good.
Very, very short question. Congratulations, very nice paper. Have you thought how to disentangle this true rebound effect with respect to the causal interpretation of having people investing in such plans because they know they are going to plan to upgrade the systems or whatever? Have you thought about that?
So maybe I should be super cautious when I'm presenting the paper, because so I know anecdotal evidence of people. My favorite story is that the guy has a large installation, smoking, and so when he goes outside to smoke, he light up the electric heating on the terrace to smoke. So that's a typical example of a story of someone who he has some free electricity and he tries to consume this free electricity. No, there are certainly other examples of people who want to, for instance, to have a heat pump, and it consumes a lot of electricity, say, okay, let's oversize, let's do both, investment in solar PV and a heat pump. And this I cannot, of course, so In both cases, it's a rebound effect. Huh? So it's not. I cannot say a word on causality. It could be.
And probably as well not on welfare implications. No, I mean that would be all good welfare things. No, to happen, which of course as well is an important perspective on the rebound discussion as such. Okay, excellent. So thanks again for presentation and for the insightful discussion. So we can move now from the Wallonie to France. And that's you, no?
Yes.
With the next presentation, looking at the French system, António Marques from the University of Beira Interior. Where is this?
Yeah, in Portugal.
Okay, see, very good. So we are really an European panel here. I recognize. So that's very good. But you're interested in the French market, in the role that demand-side management can have on the French system, especially taking into account nuclear generation. So please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Diogo Pereira. I come from Portugal, from the University of Beira Interior in Covilhã, in the interior of the country. I have to thank you, the organization, for the flexibility and the kindness of letting me present our work instead of Professor António Marques, who unfortunately cannot be in here. But sends greetings to everyone and to particular to the organization. It's the second year that I'm in here. It's a good conference. I have to say that it is an enormous pleasure to be here. In the University of Barcelona on this great symposium.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Thank you. And for the opportunity to share with you our research, our results, and mostly our doubts and concerns regarding the challenge that energy transition is facing, namely the accommodation of renewable energies. In the last year, we became analyzing high-frequency data to understand if it could provide us insights about electricity management systems and possible solutions to solve the problem of intermittent renewable energies and the peak consumption. My presentation concerns the condition needed in both supply and demand side for a successful transition. The presentation is constituted by 5 main topics. Firstly, I'm going to explain the motivation of this work. Second, I will move to issue of methodology. Then I will like to discuss the results found in this work and concluded with a little slide about how should energy policy evolve. The motivation for this work focuses on past facts and future conditions and barriers to the energy transition, summarized in 2 main topics. These 2 main topics awoke our interest to study the interactions of supply and demand sides and to argue that decision on energy must be not about consuming and supplying more electricity. Besides, this paradigm change took us to reflect how should energy policy evolve in the future. The diversification of electricity must not be a theoretical goal. It is essential to analyze and understand the condition of both supply and demand sides to achieve a successful transition. In the demand side, we have an increasing demand with a high uncertainty caused by the consumption in different periods. It is well known that peak consumption requires the flexibility of fossil fuels to fulfill them. And a flat demand or a off-peak demand can be easily fulfilled by a base load producer and intermittent renewable sources like wind power and solar PV. At the same time, we have to decrease the carbon emissions and decrease electricity price to not treating households with energy poverty. This leads us to think that future energy policy decisions shall focus these 3 perspectives, as the 3 perspectives allows to understand better the criteria of future energy policy decisions. Why choosing France? Firstly, France is not a well-known country in the literature. However, they have several curiosities and objectives that awoke our interest to employ this study. Firstly, the objective to integrate renewable energies in a system monopolized by nuclear power. Secondly, the consumption is largely made by residential and service sectors. Thirdly, the peak consumption has been growing year past year, reaching 100 gigawatts, which are often caused by the household consumption. This country is suitable to employ demand-side management by two reasons. Their consumption is made largely by residential consumption and by service sectors. Lastly, France is planning a nuclear phase-out. Since the nuclear energy is so important to France have a low carbon or low carbon intensity electricity mix, why France is doing that? This work in 5 research questions presented in the slide, and the main innovative contribution of TMS, it focused on France planning a nuclear phase-out by assessing its transition towards renewable energies, highlighting the appropriateness of disaggregated analysis of electricity demand levels and electricity sources, and empirical evidence about key factors to successful diversify the electricity mix and mitigate carbon emissions. Lastly, putting some demand-side measures forward without compromising the economy and the sustainable development. In this research, we studied the electricity sources, 8 electricity sources, all disaggregated, electricity management service, namely the import and exports of electricity and pumping systems, electricity consumption divided in morning peak, night peak, and off-peak, diversification in environment assessed by CO2 emissions, degree of diversity in electricity mix calculated by the Shannon-Weaver index, and the wholesale electricity market prices. Besides, you have used controlled variables, namely the mean temperature and the precipitation amount in all the country. We have followed the basic econometric procedures to assess the properties of data and to define well-suitable estimations to meet the data filters. Firstly, the 3 common integration order tests. Secondly, the collinearity and multicollinearity as assessed by the correlation metrics and variance inflection factors. As is expected, a high endogeneity in the model because you have the supply and the demand side at the same time in the model, we recur to vector auto-receive estimator, choosing the optimal number of flags and testing both the endogeneity and exogeneity of all variables. Lastly, you compute the diagnostic steps, namely to the phenomena of heteroscedasticity, serial correlation, and residuals normality. Lastly, you compute Granger causality, the variance decomposition, and the impulse response functions. Given time is short, this is the table of integration order tests. You can argue that all variables are I0 in their levels, are integrated of order 0. The general vector autoregressive model has been estimated with general specifications. You have to note in this slide that mean temperature and the precipitation index as put as exogenous variables, since they have no causalities, because the only causality found to the mean temperature and precipitation index is fossil fuels with a very, very low significant statistics. In short, to summarize the econometric output, well, I have to focus that the vector autoregressive legs chosen is 1 by all information criteria and tested by the lag exclusion test, which is a sign of non-omitted variable bias. The vector autoregressive failed to reject the diagnostics null hypothesis. However, when working with large samples like ours that have 2,000 daily observations, the violation of diagnostic test is virtually inconsequential, as financial literature often claims. Besides all the results that you have tested, you have made a reality check and all the results are in line with reality. Moving on, I would like to draw attention to the results. I will present three diagrams to summarize them. The consumption in morning period seems to be rational and desirable. There is a daily load transfer from the night peaks toward the morning peaks intended to exploit the solar availability. This side over here. The consumption is not diversified in morning peak because the consumption is mainly fulfilled by nuclear power and solar PV. On the contrary, the night peak had harmful effects on the environment because of the use of fossil fuels to satisfy the demand. It could be seen also that in that period, the electricity mix diversification have a positive sign, but this diversification is often caused by the use of flexible fossil fuels plants. The results also highlighted that the diversified electricity mix by renewable energies penetration could be easily achieved in an off-peak period with a smoothed consumption. So demand-side management should evolve. Firstly, stopping the load transfer from off-peak to night-peak periods, like that. There is a huge load transfer from off-peak periods to night-peak periods, mainly caused by Oswald's consumption. So the grid have to focus two strategies, valley filling and peak clipping, urgently. As mentioned previously, morning peaks are satisfied by nuclear and photovoltaic, as can be seen in this diagram. Regarding the wind power, their availability coincides with both off-peak and night-peak periods. So France has the opportunity to export this endogenous resource, which could exert a positive effect on the economy, environment, and electricity prices. However, intermittent renewable energies not only cause scarcities on the grid, they can also provoke excess of electricity. The French electricity system has been relatively closer to the exterior. The Iberian countries and Germany have exerted a huge pressure for a greater openness of national French electricity mix. However, instead of resorting cross-border markets and even fossil fuels, France has used the excess of electricity from renewable energies to pump waters to upper reservoirs. In the night periods, this pump energy is used to fulfill the night peak periods. So, in France, hydropower is working as a huge battery to defer the regeneration when the demand is high. Also, digging deeper into the analysis, the nuclear phase-out seems to be caused by the need to satisfy aggravated pressure from demand peaks. In this, nuclear phase-out is not about nuclear, it's about consumption. The consumption only leads 4 strategies to nuclear phase-out. 1, turn off and commission all nuclear power capacity. 2, induce an increase in electricity consumption in off-peak periods to fully exploit the nuclear production. 3, implement the technological measures or electricity tariffs to encourage consumers to shift their peak electricity to off-peak periods. Or the 4th strategy that is shut down part of nuclear capacity and incentivize the shift consumption to off-peak periods. This because why? France in off-peak periods have a huge electricity production from nuclear power, but the consumption is below them. In peak periods, the effect is different. Nuclear production stays here and the consumption is above. Look their economic inefficiency in the nuclear utilization. This is some supply-side interactions. It could be seen that solar PV can compete with nuclear power. However, their installed capacity is insignificant. It's still 1 or 2% of the total installed capacity. Besides, the hydropower and biomass have characteristics similar to those of natural gas in that they allow a flexibly and a readily generation and storage capabilities. Besides, hydropower electricity could be restored by pumping systems, so these two controllable renewable sources have been played a backup role for intermittent renewables and a way to fulfill the demand in high peak periods. Finally, surprisingly, France still have oil and coal source in their electricity mix, but not used. Only 2% per year of oil is used in the electricity mix of France, mainly to produce electricity when nuclear power plants having operation and management issues. For conclusion, France has potential to integrate and accommodate renewable energy sources in their electricity mix. However, the installed capacity and contribution to electricity mix is still low, around 5%. Thus, France have to design public policies to incentivize renewable energy deployment, mainly wind power and solar PV. IP consumption has increased the necessity of flexible power plants powered by fossil fuels to readily match the supply with demand. As fossil fuels are still required, the rigid patterns of consumption and the transfers from off-peak to peak periods have to be prevented quickly, as soon as possible, through price signals and price-responsive programs to demand-side demand policies for education and awareness and knowledge for the citizens. Besides, demand-side policies should focus peak clipping and barley filling periods and strategies to discipline the consumption habits. It's not good enough to focus on build and operate new wind farms and new photovoltaic plants. Instead, it's crucial that both economic engines and economics globally become more and more responsive to the fluctuation of available and intermittent renewable electricity sources. The economy has to be prepared for the new concept of net demand. This concept should become a main reference for all players. The use of intermittent production predictability could be used to compute several models and several price-responsive tariffs to stimulate change in consumption habits, namely consumption habits of households. There have been a huge problem for the peak consumption in France. However, before adapting consumption to the renewables, France has to smooth their demand, mainly to fully exploit their nuclear capacity, or decommission part of their nuclear capacity to not have so much economic inefficiencies in their electricity mix. Lastly, I think that France should open their national electricity mix to cross-border markets. They can benefit from cheapest intermittent renewable energies from Germany, shared backups from Spain. They have all the good things to open their electricity mix to cross-border markets. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thanks a lot, Diogo. Now we have again time for some questions. Please.
I'm just wondering, because you are mentioning the cross-border capacity, is there a capacity problem cross-border between France and, for example, Germany and Belgium? Because I know at least that in the other direction there's lots of import from France to Germany, for example. So I would be surprised if it wouldn't go also in the other way.
I don't understand. From France to Germany?
No, I mean, my question is, you are suggesting that they should open up for cross-border trade. At least I know that the other way, I mean, in the other direction, there's a lot of electricity coming into Germany from France, usually. And so I'm just wondering, is there any sort of capacity limit are you arguing in favor of increasing the capacity of border or cross-border trade, or what is it exactly? Is there really a problem that they have too little capacity for that?
It's not a problem of capacity, it's a problem of electricity management system. Indeed, from France to Germany, it's run a lot of electricity, mainly because the nuclear power production is too high and the consumption is too low in off-peak. But France policy and policymakers have been a problem from import electricity from Germany and from Spain. And from Spain, they could share backups, mainly through natural gas. Spain have a huge power plant of natural gas that could be shared with France. Germany have intermittent renewables at cheapest cost, but France refused to import electricity from other countries. The daily imports is 1% of the total electricity consumption, 1 or 2 or 3%, no more than that.
You mean they don't demand the electricity, therefore it's not?
Yes, they're not demand, but offer.
But here it says that Germany is a net export. Wow. Wait a minute.
Yeah, I think Germany is a net exporter to everybody surrounding Germany. So that's general in electricity, yes, and to a big extent. And I think indeed, I mean, if you look at market price differentials between Germany and France, I think they have increased over the last years. Whatever might be the driver, no, but it looks like there is a problem in the markets. No, it's getting not more integrated, but actually more separated in the last years, and I think that's really a problem as well from the German side. May I ask you probably a follow-up question on your modeling? I mean, you've been doing let's say technology-specific econometric model of the energy sector in France. I was wondering first, you have not really talked about elasticities or something like that, no? Which would be probably nice, no, to see, because in the paper you were all doing this with variance decomposition, which I think is similar concept, no? But it's, I mean, I guess in presenting the results, it would be nice to understand a bit better, no? How these elasticities are changing as well over time, and I think it would be as well nice for the presentation of the results. And I'm as well wondering in terms of specification of your technology sets, whether, I mean, we are controlling for technologies, I think, no? You're as well looking for peak and off-peak, but there might be more characteristics, no, to the generation that you might want to take into account, but I'm not sure, no? I mean, to what extent do you have to differentiate, no, the real possibilities, no, to substitute one technology for the other, no, take into account all these other things, no, ramp-up costs and all this, no? Is that well captured, or?
Yes, the technology-specific effects are all captured as the substitution effect between them. In the supply interactions, I quickly pass them because they are generally and not that far away from the literature. Indeed, you have right. I don't talk the various decomposition. It's very interesting because in France, they have a various composition based by daily. You can watch how the electricity system is evolving. Mainly the core result that we have found is about the peak consumption. They're explaining more or less 1.28 of the price, and after 31 days, the model is stable, and peak is planning 1.29. It's not changing. The peak has a huge effect on price and has not changed everything. Even with model stable, that effect continues the same. But in case of natural gas, the peak consumption is causing a huge impact. They begin causing, explaining 5% of natural gas production, and after 31 days and 62 days, the peak consumption explaining about 40% of the electricity production from natural gas. As the same as the nuclear power production, the peak consumption and the off-peak have been reducing the nuclear production, and it could be seen that nuclear production explains themselves in the first periods, in 2012, but mainly through 2040, the consumption explaining basically 30% of nuclear power production, diminishing them mainly.
Okay, probably just the last question out of curiosity. What's the effect, what's the activity that's behind the peak in France? I mean, why do you have these peaks at night, if I understood?
Yes.
Right? What are you doing there?
Mainly the peak in France is caused by household consumption. The people arrive home and connect all the products, the TV, the washing machine, begin cooking, washing clothes, and this all causing this peak effect.
Okay.
As it same happens in the morning, where the people wake up, they begin consuming electricity, and the industry begins warming their machines and have a huge effect on consumption.
Okay, so night would mean 8 o'clock, or what would night?
Generally, in the night, the peak at night occurs from 7, 8 o'clock to 10, 11 o'clock.
Okay, I'm relieved. I was thinking what these French guys are doing in the mid of the night. So, okay, good. So that will be difficult to change, no? Because that seems to me like a profound change in the way the French are living. But probably the demand-side management can help with that. Okay, excellent. So thanks again for the nice presentation. And let's move to the last one, actually from Rocio, Román-Collado from the University of Seville, talking about the Spanish wholesale market and decomposition of costs, please.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for the organizing committee. Thank you to share again my research with all of you. I have to confess, I hope the presentation will be right. I have to confess today is my birthday, so I'm celebrating with you. Thank you. I'm having fun, but I'm waiting for my presentation. Well, this is a joint paper with other colleagues from the chair on energy environmental economics that is supported by Red Eléctrica España at the University of Seville. This is still a work in progress, so all your questions will be welcome, but be nice because today is a special day. So it's just a tool proposal just to detect operating anomalies in the Spanish wholesale electricity market. Well, the presentation I will try to follow, as a research academic, I will try to follow the usual structure of the paper, right? I will just focus on the motivation and some introduction of the issue, and they will follow through the methodology very slightly. I will explain the data set, how do we get, mainly the results, and finally our conclusions. Well, As most of you probably know, but I would like just focus on that idea. The liberalization process in Spain starts around 1997 with the transposition of the directive, of the European directive, that looks for, to strengthen the security of energy supply, also to introduce competition, and of course to work with the environmental protection. The final aim of that transformation was, in fact, that the consumers could afford a lower price of electricity. But also the Spanish government tried to introduce more competition and ask companies to separate the generation and commercialization activities. So vertical integration was also forbidden. So with this idea, of course, in the Spanish, or usually in the electricity market, we usually look at this index, the Herfindahl-Hertzman index, try to look at if the business concentration measure is right or not. I mean, the usual level is around 2000. The European Union considered that under 2000 will be okay. As you can see here, well, I don't know if this is right. In 2008, it was around 1,600, the last column, and in 2000 it was decreased until 2015 was around 1,226. So it seems that the process, the liberalization process, was right because the concentration looks like lower. However, the research literature says, okay, this is just a measure, but when we find that there are few number of companies in this market, it might be some collusive behaviors, and maybe this index cannot show us, in fact, what is going on in that market. So the National Commission Markets and Competition, this is the Spanish authority that is responsible for specifically to find out this collusive behavior in markets. In some periods that was there, 2001, 2005, 2013, and around 2016, 17, this commission analyzed some behaviors in the wholesale electricity market in Spain. He found something that wasn't really correct. Some newspapers were aware of this problem, this issue. People was very sensitive with this kind of problems. We just focused in 2013 because there is a case file that we have here where in some months, this National Commission found that the price of electricity was higher than what it was usual for that period in other years, in other months also. So finally, with this case file, the Commission just imposed some sanctions to one company, for example, Iberdrola, just tell us that this company probably cut production capacity during this period in order to increase the wholesale market price. So with that idea in mind, what we are looking is to look at this period and try to know if with our tool we are able to detect these anomalies in the Spanish wholesale electricity market. Well, the methodology. We provide, our tool is based in the index decomposition analysis, and specifically in the logarithmic mean divisor index approach that is very well known, LMDI. It has been broadly applied in the last years for many problems related with environmental and energy problems, as we mentioned before, with CO2 emissions, with energy consumption. Is part of my last papers were based on this kind of methodology. But in this case, we are just applying this one of a specific version of this method, that is the spatial LMDI analysis. This methodology has recently applied to multi-regional analysis of environmental variables for countries, and this method tried to explain the environmental behavior of one country respect to the reference country or to a reference region. And in fact, explanations come from the decomposition effects. So, the novelty of our work is to, as far as we know, right, is to apply this methodology, but to the cost of electricity, and specifically in the Spanish wholesale electricity market. The methodology is going to tell us which are the main drivers and inhibitors effects that are behind the cost of the daily cost of electricity compared with the average of that month, in order to find out or to highlight which are the main effects that are behind these anomalies, if we find some anomalies. Of course, this methodology can be applied at the different levels, but for this paper, we just focus on the daily analysis of the electricity cost. Of course, we have to look at the hourly cost of electricity, and this electricity is going to be, or the generation of this electricity is going to be disaggregated in 8 technologies. In fact, we are going to consider conventional hydraulics, pure pumping hydro, nuclear, domestic coal, import coal, combined cycle, special market regime, or technologies in the special market regime, and imports, right? Of course, we need, for our methodology, to know the monthly average cost of electricity. With that in mind, our methodology will follow like this. Okay, for one day, we have capital C is the cost of electricity of one day for one technology. And this cost of electricity we have calculated, it comes from the price of pool of that day times the energy generated by this technology. The price of pool is an average, weight average of the hourly pool of price, or price of pool, right, of that day. So we can decompose this cost in 3 factors. The first one is the cost of electricity of one day of one technology in terms of the units of electricity generated by that technology. The second factor is the relative weight of that electricity generated by one technology respect to the total electricity generated in that day. And finally, we have the total electricity generated in that day. So we have 3 factors, what we name price factor, structure factor, and scale factor. This is for one day, but we have to do it also for the average. So we have the total cost of one technology, but for the average of the month, right, is similar to the previous one. So we have, again, 3 factors. Again, we decomposed, and we consider the price, the structure, and the scale effect, right? The only difference is that this is the average. So we apply the composition analysis, and we are going to do it in additive way. That case, our result, our decomposition effects are going to be measured in the same unit that the cost in euros. So what we are going to do is, okay, the difference between the cost of one technology of one day compared to the average of that month is going to be separated in three effects: the price effect, the structure effect, and the scale effect. The price effect measures which part of that difference is due to the price of the pool of one day compared to the average. The second effect, the structure effect, is going to measure which part of this difference has been due or is due to the relative weight of that technology on the total energy supply of one day, compared always with the average. And the third effect, the scale effect, is going to tell us which part of this difference is due to the energy or the total energy demand of one day compared to the average of that month, right? And then finally we have the weighted factor at the end. So our data set, the period. Well, the period we have tried to consider the period where the national commissions say that something was wrong in that period. Okay, so we took 3 months before December, since September 2013, and until February, 2 months after February of 2014. Prices, well, prices and generation of energy comes from the Iberian market operator, right? They were supplied by this institution. And finally, the cost of energy is calculated, so the prices and the generation of energy are primary data, and the cost of energy are secondary data. They are calculated by the authors. So these are the first. Let's see our results. Okay. Here we have 3 months. We are just instead of showing all the months that we have studied, I'm just showing you 3 months. This is September 2013, October 2013, December 2013. So we see 3 technologies: conventional hydraulic in red, a combined cycle in black, and technologies in the special regime in green, right? So what we can see here is exactly the difference between the cost of that technology one day compared to the average of that month, right? So what we think is usual, of course, this is at the end is going to be an average. So there will be days that the costs are higher than the average and days that the costs are lower than the average. That's normal, of course. The first thing that we can look at this is that the green bars are large, right? So maybe we can say that the special regime technologies has more variability than the others, right? The other thing that I can see if I look at September or October is that the costs are sometimes at least 3-4 days higher, and then the following are 3-4 days lower, and that's a change every 3 or 4 days. But if we look at the month of December, it happens that at least, of course, there are some exceptions, at least during the first part of the month, between the 2nd to the 20th, the cost of these 3 technologies are higher than the average. So it was like a broad period where the cost was persistent higher than the average. Then, of course, the other part were lower than the average. So it's like irregular thing in terms of the comparison. This also happens if we compare with other months that we are not showing here, right? This is just looking at the cost. But, of course, what we are doing is now looking for the effects. These are not the effects. It's just showing what is going on with the total cost of the technologies. Well, this is just to revise what I have just said. What the first thing that we look at is an unusual behavior of daily costs in the case of December, right? In December, we can say that the pattern of cost behavior is really quite different from the other 2 months that we are comparing to as a control month, right? That the costs were higher during a very broad period between the 2nd and the 18th, around 18th of December. On the contrary, since this 20th of December, the costs were lower. This doesn't happen in the case of September and October. Now we are going to look at the effects. Now I'm just going to show you September and compare with December in order not to show so many data, but the results are quite similar. Let's see now. We have, instead of 3 months, we have 3 technologies. The first figure is the special regime in September 2013, conventional hydraulic in 2013, September, and combined cycle in 2013. Okay, the price effect is in blue, the structure effect is orange, and the scale effect is gray around, right? So let's look at some behavior. If we look at this, I try to just to, during the first days of the month, let's look at between the 2nd and the 5th or 6th, you can see that the scale effect is positive, right? Let's remember the scale effect. The scale effect means, of course, if the energy demand of at that day is increasing, the scale effect is going to be positive and is going to increase cost. That's natural. If the scale effect is positive, this means that the economy needs energy, right? What happened those days? If the scale effect is positive, what we are expecting is, for example, we look at the special regime. If the special regime doesn't offer, for example, a special regime, the structure effect is negative those days, right? The scale effect is positive and the structure effect is negative those days. What means the structure effect, let's remember, is the relative weight of this technology compared to the total energy of that day. So this means that this technology is losing weight that day. Maybe this technology couldn't couldn't supply enough energy that day. What we expect, okay, so if the special regime cannot offer this energy, the conventional hydraulic offer, even the combined cycle also offer. So when the special regime cannot afford, cannot go in, cannot supply, when there is a positive scale effect, then the other two energy technologies offer. Something similar happens between days, for example, between 23 and 26, right? Here, when these technologies doesn't, or at least when we look at the negative structure, we looks like the others to increase structure. and the inverse. For example, in the last days, between 27, this technology increased weight, and the others two decrease weight. If the special regime increase their energy, the supply, the others two, if they are not necessary, they are not offering, right? So this is the first thing that we see. Another idea, if we look at the price effect in blue, again, what we see is some days the price effect is positive, means that it's higher than the average. Some other effect, the price effect is lower. But these periods are changing along the month. Every 3-4 days, the price effect is positive, and every 3-4 days, the price effect is negative and is changing. This happens for these three technologies. I just chosen these three technologies because, okay, a special regime is, those are technologies that, of course, they are conditioning by the climatic factors, but the others two, conventional hydraulic, of course, is also conditioned by the warm down water, and finally combined cycle offer if they ask for. So it's just like a measure between manageable and not manageable technologies. But what happened during the month of December? During the month of December, we can look at the same steps than we did before. The first days of December, we can look at between the 2nd and the 5th. Of course, again, the scale effect in gray is positive. And the special regime structure effect is negative. So this means that between the 2nd and the 5th, the special regime couldn't supply this energy, so it was supplemented by the conventional hydraulic and combined cycle. There was no problem. But what happened during this period, that the scale effect was positive, the special regime was negative structure effect. They couldn't supply the energy that they were asked for, and the conventional hydraulic also was negative. The conventional hydraulic was able to offer energy here. It was able to offer energy here, but what happened here? What happened? The down water disappeared or wasn't able to offer energy those days. Of course, it was supplemented by the other technology, combined cycle, has to increase the energy because the others two didn't do during that days, right? So, if we look at the price effect, the behavior is quite different from the previous one. The price effect is positive, is persistent positive during the first part of the month, at least during that period where we find something that is irregular. And if the price effect is positive, means that it's a driver, an important driver that is increasing the cost of energy during those periods, right? So this is more or less our results. We are looking, first of all, we look at the cost. We see which are the main differences in terms of the average. Then we look at the effects, the decomposition effects, and we look how the behavior in every month and every technology. What we find, if we link all these decomposition effects, what we see is that during the month of September, what it seems to be usual is that when the scale effect is positive, because there is an increase of demand, The structural effect of the special regime is negative because it can't supply this energy, it can't afford to go in, then the other two technologies are positive in their structural effect. The relative weight of these technologies increase, so they supplemented this other technology that can't do it during that period. But in the month of December, it doesn't happen this. What we see is that when the scale effect is positive, there are some periods where the special regime doesn't go in, the structural effect of this technology is negative, and also the conventional hydraulic is negative, right? Additionally, the price effect is always positive during this period, so it can be a sign that the technology are taking advantage of this behavior. Our conclusions, first conclusions, because we are still in progress, we want to advance with this, we want to go in with this research, is we find some anomalies, right, in the behavior of the cost and in the decomposition effects, but we have, of course, many limitations. We would like to incorporate in our data the market of technical restrictions, because sometimes the increase in price is due to this market. This is a possible reason that we would like to know about it. Also is that, well, we identify some anomalies, but in fact, we can't explain the reason exactly that they are behind these anomalies. So, of course, it's the National Commission, the authority that has to say, but we would like to know more about this problem. And, of course, the use of this methodology is conditioned by the data. We don't have always all the data that we would like, so this is another limitation that is in terms of institution and not of the authors. So this would be nice to be solved. So thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thanks, Rocio. We already have first question.
I'm just wondering, in your setup, you seem to argue a bit as if all these technologies are independent from each other. And I could imagine that somebody owns them, and this somebody might have a mixture of all these. So I'm not quite sure, and it would be nice if you could explain what the special regime actually is. So what is a special regime? This is renewables. So, but if one can, for whatever reason, see that, let's say, the weather forecast says in the next 3 weeks there is absolutely no wind blowing, so you can more or less, without being too smart, figure out that they are not on the market, and you own both the gas turbines and the hydro dams. It's all in your portfolio. Perhaps it's a very good idea to stop producing hydro energy. So because you can count on that, you get the risk otherwise is if you cannot be sure that there is some technology not available, then of course if you screw up the price via reducing, for example, your hydro, you cannot be sure that your gas is actually called in. But if you, for whatever reason, have some sort of forecast or whatever it is that stops the renewables from providing, if you have some evidence on that, then it's of course a risk-free strategy.
It's just, you want me to say?
There's no both these things. If they are owned by different entities, of course this doesn't make sense, but otherwise it would.
Well, this is, the problem is that they are concentrated in some owners, so I don't want to focus the problem on these companies. I just say that this technology was able to produce in the first days of the month, and at the end of the month was so it's difficult to think that suddenly happen. Of course, something could happen, but it's not explained by the behavior of the renewables, that they are, of course, conditioned by the climatic factors.
Elisa.
Hi, yes. I'm wondering if you somehow check the level of the reservoirs or the raining of that autumn, because I think that might have some effect also in the decision to generate the hydroelectricity.
What we know is that it was a normal month. The reserve were the usual. I think the idea is if they were able to offer the first day and the last day, in 10 days, they don't disappear, the water. I mean, we have read about that, and this is the only thing that I can tell you, is that it was a normal month. It wasn't very different from other pattern of the year, but could be something wrong, I don't know.
No, I would like just to tell you that, as you said, you are discovering anomalies. But it can be happen that always you are expecting a big peak on January. And usually, if you are managing the reservoir, you want to keep the water in the reservoir for the month of January. That is, at least in Spain, when you have the bigger peak. And I remember that when I worked in Red Eléctrica, always was thinking about the big peak that you have in January. So if you are analyzing the risk, maybe you want to keep a certain amount of water not going down in order to be able to offer on the back day of January.
Mm-hmm. I just can tell that we have checked during the January and February, and we didn't find this clear pattern for this month. It's quite weird, and maybe this is the reason why the Commission, they say something is weird here. The same thing that we are looking at, they would say, with another tools, I don't know. Yeah.
Well, thank you for your talk. It was very interesting, and happy birthday.
Thank you.
So, just a quick, I never work on this area, but I am very interested in what you were saying. But I wonder if September and December are identical months, or if the same methodology can be equally applied. Because when I was looking at December, I was thinking on holidays, Christmas, lights, and so on and so forth. So I wonder if, first of all, if the pattern of demand is identical at the beginning of the month of December and then later on, because I have the impression that there is much more demand at the end. But it may not be the case, it's just an impression. So I wonder, how do you account for, in this methodology, with potential seasonality differences? That was, I think, my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the demand we measure by the scale effect, and what we see is that quite different. In fact, well, the presentation is not here, right? But the variation of cost was terrible higher than the others, because we haven't looked at the numbers. It was huge, the differences among this. So the wins, the winners in that month should be very, very higher.
There's another question here.
The question is, you observed only one December, right?
Yeah.
So it's a particular behavior of 1 year in one month. And the second is my question, whether or not this December could be different than others. This is one thing. The second thing is similar than previous question. You have behavior in the first part of the month and completely different behavior in the second part of the month, which coincide with the holidays. So do you think that perhaps it could be supported by an accumulation of activity in the first part of the month in order to be relaxed in the second part, or something, some explanation like this?
Well, thank you. I have to confess that our research is for 2013 and some months after. In fact, we are looking at the month that the National Commission was focused on. So we haven't compared with other December, really because we don't have the data. So this is part of our future final research, is just to compare if this is a pattern of Decembers, and all Decembers are like that, and this could be, and also compare with other, I don't know, January, as she was telling us. All these kind of things could be one reason for this. I don't discard it.
Okay, so I should finish in time, and exactly we are there. I just want to make one comment, if you allow. I mean, I found that really interesting because it's a new approach. I was wondering a bit, and that's probably for afterwards, what's the progress against the Herfindahl-Hirschman index? No, because there, I mean, you're looking at market shares, aggregating market shares, and here I think you're as well bringing in this concept, no, in the logarithmic mean divisor index, no, because you are looking at shares there again, no, and I mean in the discussion about market power, I mean many people are convinced that this is not a good idea, no, but you should rather look at residual supply index or whatever. So quantities do not really tell you the full story, and it would be interesting, and I think that as well was reflected in some of the comments. Now it would be nice, of course, as well to look more on marginal pricing in the markets and on constraints on technologies and how to improve then with your approach on this Herfindahl-Hirschman index. But that's just my last comment. And then I'm happy to hand over, because now we have the plenary, and I would like to thank again all the presenters. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure you have as well learned a lot, so thanks a lot.
Thank you.